My name is Arthur Pendleton. I am 32 years old, and for the first time in my life, I was a homeowner. I had moved to Maple Creek, Ohio, for a very specific reason: peace. In my line of work as a freelance graphic designer, my entire world exists inside a computer screen, a chaotic whirlwind of client demands, tight deadlines, and endless revisions. My home, I decided, would be the opposite. It would be my sanctuary, a place of order, tranquility, and meticulously manicured grass. The house I bought was a modest single-story craftsman, but it had a perfect rectangular backyard. It was my canvas. I envisioned quiet mornings on the porch with a cup of black coffee, the scent of freshly cut lawn in the air, the only sound being the chirping of robins and the gentle hum of the cicadas in the big oak tree. For the first 2 weeks, it was exactly that. It was heaven. I spent hours pulling weeds, edging the lawn with the precision of a surgeon, and I even planted a small vegetable garden. I was building my fortress of solitude, a place where the chaos of the world could not touch me. Then I met Rick. Rick lived in the house directly behind mine. Our backyards were separated by a chain link fence that was in some places more suggestion than barrier. Rick was the living embodiment of everything I had moved to Maple Creek to escape. He was loud. He was chaotic. He was the kind of man who seemed to be perpetually hosting a party for an audience of one. He owned two gigantic, rust-streaked gas grills, but seemingly not a single shirt. His uniform consisted of cargo shorts and a rotation of faded tank tops with phrases like "Weekend Warrior" or "Sun's out, guns out." His days, even on a Tuesday, seemed to start with a 10 a.m. Coors Light cracked open in his driveway, accompanied by the thumping bass of a classic rock station that he probably thought was a deep cut but was really just Boston for the fifth time that week. My peaceful sanctuary had a problem, and its name was Rick. But the real problem, the catalyst for the storm that was to come, was Duke. Duke was Rick's dog, a massive, goofy, and otherwise completely charming golden retriever. Duke was a beautiful animal, with a tail that never stopped wagging and a friendly demeanor that made it impossible to dislike him. Unfortunately, Duke had a very particular, very punctual, and very public ritual. Every morning, like clockwork, he would find the weakest point in our shared fence, squeeze his big body through, trot to the absolute dead center of my perfect lawn, and deposit a steaming monument to his morning meal. It was never near the sidewalk. It was never hidden behind my azalea bushes. It was always right in the middle, a bull's on the green heart of my property, as if he were planting a flag. The first time it happened, I sighed and cleaned it up. I was a new homeowner, a new neighbor. I told myself it was an accident. Maybe Duke got out. The second time, 2 days later, my jaw tightened. I cleaned it up again, my annoyance growing. The third time, the very next day, I knew this was not an accident. This was a pattern. This was a statement. My sanctuary had been violated, so I decided to be a reasonable adult. I took a deep breath, put on my friendliest smile, and walked over to Rick's house. He was predictably standing by one of his grills, poking at a lone, sizzling sausage, a silver can of beer sweating in his other hand. The music was loud enough that I had to raise my voice to be heard. I introduced myself, complimented his dog, and then, as politely as I could, I explained the situation. I asked if he could perhaps keep Duke on a leash, or at the very least, come scoop up the presents his dog was leaving in my yard. Rick took a long, slow sip of his beer, looked me dead in the eye, and delivered the line that would echo in my head for weeks. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and said, "It's all nature, bro, you don't own the earth." He then turned back to his sausage, a clear dismissal. That was it. No apology, no offer to fix the problem. Just a condescending, pseudo-philosophical brush-off. I stood there for a moment, stunned into silence. It was in that moment I realized this wasn't a simple issue of a stray dog. This was a declaration of war. My world had been shaken. My problem wasn't just dog poop anymore. It was Rick. He was my nemesis, the king of chaos reigning from his barbecue-scented throne, and my pristine, orderly world was his chosen battlefield. I was not going to let him win. My first attempts to solve the problem were logical, practical, and in retrospect, laughably naive. I thought I could outsmart a man who used nature as an excuse for his own laziness. My first move was to fortify the fence. I spent an entire Saturday afternoon walking the perimeter, using zip ties and spare wire to patch every single gap I could find. I reinforced the bottom, tightened the loose sections, and stood back, proud of my work. My fortress was secure. The next morning, I woke up, poured my coffee, and looked out the window. There it was, a fresh pile mocking me from the center of the lawn. I walked outside, confused. The fence was intact. How did he get in? Then I saw it. Duke hadn't squeezed through a gap. He had simply dug a shallow trench underneath a section I had overlooked. He was more determined than I had anticipated. My respect for the dog grew while my resentment for his owner festered. Fine. Plan B: if I couldn't keep him out, I would make my yard an undesirable location for his morning business. I went to the hardware store and bought a motion-activated sprinkler. The packaging promised to deter deer, raccoons, and other pests. I figured it would work on a golden retriever. I set it up, positioning the sensor to cover the central part of my lawn. I felt clever, picturing Duke getting a surprising shower and retreating back to his own yard. The next day, I sat by my window waiting. I saw Rick come out, beer in hand, and watch as Duke trotted toward the fence. Duke found his tunnel, wriggled under, and started his usual journey to the center of my yard. He entered the sprinkler's kill zone. Whoosh, a jet of cold water shot out, hitting Duke square on his fluffy side. For a second, he looked startled. Then something amazing and terrible happened. Duke, being a retriever, a breed that considers water to be the greatest thing in the universe, thought this was a game. He started barking happily, jumping in and out of the spray, pouncing on the sprinkler head and having the absolute time of his life. From across the fence, I could hear Rick laughing, a deep, booming laugh that cut right through me. After playing in his personal water park for a few minutes, a thoroughly soaked and joyful Duke squatted down and did his business not 5 feet from the sprinkler that was supposed to deter him. The defeat was crushing. My brilliant plan had backfired, providing entertainment for my enemy and a fun new toy for his dog. My next attempt was chemical warfare. I read online that dogs dislike the smell of citrus, so I bought several bottles of concentrated citrus-scented animal repellent. I spent an evening spraying it all over my lawn. The yard reeked. It smelled like a lemon tree had exploded in a chemical factory. It was overpowering, but I told myself it was worth it for the victory. The next morning, the smell was still hanging in the air, and right in the middle of the most fragrant section of the lawn, glistening in the morning dew, was a fresh pile. It was as if Duke had taken the citrus scent as a personal challenge. It was at this point that things started to feel personal. Rick was no longer just a lazy neighbor. He was actively enjoying my struggle. I'd catch him watching from his porch, a smug grin on his face as I performed the daily ritual of scooping Duke's droppings. The final straw came when my parents were scheduled to visit. They were so proud that I had bought my own house and I wanted everything to be perfect. I spent the day before they arrived cleaning, gardening, and mowing the lawn. I even put out a little welcome mat. That morning I woke up with a knot in my stomach. I looked out the window and my heart sank, not one but two piles. It was like Duke had brought a friend. I felt a surge of rage followed by a wave of complete and utter despair. I was a 32-year-old man defeated by a dog and his juvenile owner. I looked at my beautiful yard, my sanctuary, now just a public toilet. Rick's laughter from the sprinkler incident echoed in my ears. I felt foolish. I felt helpless. My home wasn't a fortress, it was a joke. I actually considered putting the house back on the market. Maybe Maple Creek wasn't for me. Maybe I was destined to live in a sterile apartment where the only grass was in a pot on the balcony. I walked outside with my scoop and a plastic bag, my shoulders slumped in defeat. As I scooped up the foul mess, I looked at the bag in my hand. It was a weapon, a disgusting, smelly, organic weapon. And Rick's own words came back to me. It's all nature, bro. He was right. It was nature. And nature, I decided, was about to be returned to its source. A new kind of plan began to form in my mind. It was not logical. It was not practical. It was poetic. It was then I knew I was built different too. My new plan required patience, a strong stomach, and a 5-gallon bucket from Home Depot. I started my collection. Every morning when Duke made his deposit, I would go out with my scooper, but instead of putting it in the trash, I added it to the bucket. I lined the bucket with a heavy-duty trash bag, of course. I wasn't an animal. After each addition, I'd add a little bit of water. I told myself it was for aesthetic reasons, but really I was creating a slurry, a vile, primordial soup of digested dog food and righteous indignation. For 2 weeks, I continued this grim harvest. The bucket, which I kept hidden behind my air conditioning unit, grew heavier and more potent with each passing day. It was my secret project, my cauldron of vengeance. The smell was breathtakingly awful, but every time I caught a whiff, I thought of Rick's smug face and it strengthened my resolve. Finally, the time was right. It was a Saturday morning and I saw Rick load up his oversized pickup truck and drive away, presumably to buy more beer and questionable meat products. The coast was clear. I put on a pair of rubber gloves and a face mask. I retrieved the bucket. The contents had fermented into something that defied description. It was a thick, brown, cursed sludge. Carrying it felt like I was holding a container of pure, concentrated evil. I walked to the edge of my property, right up to the line where my pristine lawn met his weed-infested wasteland. And then I began to paint. Using a small garden trowel, I scooped out the foul mixture and began to meticulously apply it to his side of the property line. I created a disgusting, stinking border around his entire backyard. I paid special attention to the areas he frequented most. The perimeter of his wooden deck, the area around his 2 grills, and a generous circle around his precious fire pit where he often sat with his friends, laughing and being loud. It was like spreading a toxic frosting on a cake of despair. When I was done, the bucket was empty and his yard had a new, distinct, and deeply offensive border. I cleaned up my tools, disposed of the gloves and mask, and went back to my porch. I sat down in my favorite chair with a fresh cup of coffee and waited. A few hours later, Rick returned. He swaggered into his backyard, a case of Coors Light under his arm. He stopped dead in his tracks. He sniffed the air, his nose wrinkling in disgust. He took another sniff, turning his head from side to side like a confused animal. "What the hell is that smell?" he yelled to no one in particular. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee. I leaned back in my chair, looked over the fence, and called out to him. "Smells like nature, bro." The look on his face, a mixture of confusion, disgust, and dawning realization, was one of the most satisfying things I have ever witnessed. But I wasn't done. Oh no, that was just phase 1. Phase 2 was about taking the battle public. Our neighborhood had a community Facebook group. It was called the Maple Creek Community Hub, and it was mostly used for posting about lost cats, announcing garage sales, and complaining about people driving too fast. It was a wholesome, G-rated corner of the internet. It was time to change that. That evening, I made my first post. I took a picture of the latest deposit from Duke, a well-lit, high-resolution shot, and posted it to the group. The caption read, "Good evening, neighbors. Found this lovely steaming hot dog present near my mailbox this morning, a real work of art. If this belongs to you, please feel free to come and collect your property before it fossilizes into a permanent part of our local geology. Thanks so much." The post got a few confused laugh reacts at first. Then someone commented, "Is that what I think it is?" The next day I did it again. Lost and found alert. Another mysterious organic sculpture has appeared in the center of my lawn. Seems to be from the same artist as yesterday. The medium is bold and fragrant. Please claim what's yours. I kept it up every single day. I became the neighborhood's weird poop correspondent. My posts became more elaborate. I started giving them ratings. Today's offering, it's a 7 out of 10 for placement, but a 4 out of 10 for form. A bit loose. The artist may have been rushed. People started to catch on. The comments shifted from confusion to amusement and then to solidarity. A woman named Sharon, who lived 2 doors down from Rick, commented, "Wait a minute, I've been getting these in my flower beds for months." Another neighbor, a quiet man named Mr. Henderson, chimed in, "My poodle stepped in one of those just last week. I thought it was a stray." The tide was turning. Rick was becoming a local legend, but not in a good way. He was the Phantom Pooper's owner. The final phase of my plan was where my creative skills truly came to shine. I decided to turn my lawn into a protest art installation. I went to the craft store and bought popsicle sticks, cardstock, glitter, and a bag of googly eyes. That night, I sat at my desk, the same desk where I designed sleek corporate logos, and I crafted a series of tiny signs. They were passive-aggressive masterpieces. Each one was a small, laminated piece of cardstock glued to a popsicle stick, decorated with googly eyes and an unhealthy amount of glitter. And on each sign I wrote a haiku. I planted the first one right next to the latest pile. It read, "Dear Duke the Pooper, this is not your golden throne, my grass feels betrayed." I made more. I scattered them across the lawn, creating a shimmering, poetic minefield of shame. A brown surprise waits in the green field of my dreams, oh the tragedy. And another, "Your dog's morning gift is not a joy to receive, please just scoop it up." Rick was not amused. The day after the haiku garden appeared, he stormed over to my house. This was the confrontation I had been waiting for. His face was beet red, a vein throbbing in his temple. He wasn't wearing a shirt, of course. "What is wrong with you?" he bellowed, pointing a shaky finger at my lawn. "Are you trying to make me look bad?" I remained perfectly calm. I was no longer the timid, frustrated man who had first approached him weeks ago. I had been forged in the fires of passive aggression. I had stared into the abyss of a poop bucket and emerged stronger. I took a sip of my iced tea, looked him squarely in the eye, and delivered the final blow. "Buddy," I said, my voice even and cool, "I don't need to try." He stood there, speechless. He opened his mouth, then closed it. There was nothing he could say. He knew I was right. He hadn't been shamed by my actions. He had been exposed by his own. My signs and my posts didn't create the situation. They merely documented it for the world to see. He turned around without another word and stomped back to his house. The war was over. The aftermath was swift and beautiful. The neighborhood had fully turned on him. At the next homeowners association meeting, which Rick was forced to attend, the issue of unclaimed canine deposits was the primary topic of conversation. Faced with a room full of angry neighbors and printouts of my Facebook posts, Rick crumbled. Within a week, a team of contractors was in his backyard, building a tall, sturdy wooden fence with a proper gate. A fenced-in dog run appeared in the corner of his yard, and soon after I saw it, Rick walking Duke down the street on a leash, a plastic baggie tied to the handle, like a normal, responsible human being. My lawn returned to its pristine, sacred state. The air was filled with the scent of cut grass and blooming flowers, not dog crap. I had won. My sanctuary was restored. My new normal is quiet and peaceful, just as I had always wanted. I still have my morning coffee on the porch. I still tend to my garden. Rick and I don't speak, but sometimes I see him walking Duke and he pointedly looks away. The victory is sweet, but something unexpected came out of it. I discovered I have a strange talent for yard art. Every now and then, for my own amusement, I'll make a new haiku sign and plant it among my tomato plants or by the bird bath. They're no longer about protest. They're just little bits of weirdness that make me smile. Last week, S was my favorite. The squirrel is watching. He plots to steal my peppers, his tiny hands scheme. A neighbor saw it and asked if I would make one for her garden. Apparently, there's a market for passive-aggressive poetry. I won the war, restored order to my little corner of the world, and accidentally started a small business creating decorative haiku signs. And every time I look out at my perfect, poop-free lawn, I smile. Victory, as it turns out, smells like fresh-cut grass and the sweet, sweet scent of poetic justice.